go ahead and call the meeting to order. Real quick, we will do Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Most everybody's here. We have, so introduction to guests. If anybody has, or wants to give public comment?
Not at this time, thank you.
We do guests and public comment at the beginning of the meeting.
What's your name now?
My name is Lee Kunkel.
Oh, let's stand.
Okay. You probably know me because I was one of the leaders for the referendum for water quality.
Yeah, okay. When you read the comment, you're like, okay, she looks familiar, but okay.
All righty, and next piece of business is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes or any suggestions or edits?
I'll motion.
All right, second?
I'll second it.
All righty, it has been officially moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None? All right. County approved bylaws. I don't see any of our commissioner friends here. Did anybody get a copy of those?
Yeah, the one that was already signed off.
Yeah, that was the one that was already sent out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remove that from the agenda then. All right. Any questions or issues with those bylaws? Didn't have any, but-
You know, I didn't.
They made
print
some
them out.
revisions, right?
I think here in a while
Yeah,
ago.
they had some things that were for them that they needed to have in mostly. But, yeah.
But everybody saw them.
There was nothing, no problem with them.
But they're all like now ready and
It's our bylaws.
ready and signed.
They're our bylaws.
Okay, all
Fully,
right.
fully blessed.
Excellent. Okay. All right, I guess turn the meeting over. Status of criteria, guidelines, and ranking. So
Those were recommended
Yep.
and also went to the county commissioners, and I don't know the outcome.
Not as of yet, no.
Not as of yet.
Okay.
Not approved by.
Pending, okay?
But
If I
they
could just
were
make-
sent, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to make a quick comment. We talked about it earlier with Dave and Jason, that now that the election's over, we're going to have a new county commissioner. I think at some point in the new year, we make this connection. We'll see if any of those commissioners are going to come to our meetings. And we're going to be engaging them and their solicitor on some key issues as they come up, as we go through a lot of these documents. Obviously, they're going to be approving them. And I just have come to realize with all the advisory boards, with the commissioners, that communication is really going to be important. So we're going to be engaging them in the next couple months and their solicitor on reviewing a lot of these documents.
I did talk to Safranco, and he indicated he was going to try and get to a meeting, so just to get up to speed a little bit
Right.
between now and when.
Well, Dennis, you suggested to me that maybe we ought to try to get a meeting with him so that we can bring him up to speed too. So,
He was here for our first one.
Yeah.
that's right.
He's at cap speed.
Sorry, Dawn, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was only going to say that I think the approved version, which had been updated with your changes, was sent out to you, and I think there also might be copies here, just so that you have them for your records of what was approved.
All right. So anything else we need to do with that, or we're still just, everything's waiting on official approval?
Right.
Okay, just make sure. All right, Conservation 101 presentation.
I shall now present.
Yay.
You can look studious. No, no.
Just in case it's small print.
So basically, quickly, I wanted to, before we get into the application and the program manual, so the next steps of this process, I wanted to do a relatively brief kind of land conservation 101 and how, basically how is a land trust, and this would be similar for municipality, how we go about doing a project. So, wow, let's see, if I stand here, I won't be blinded. So I'm going to go over the types of protection, due diligence for a project, different funding considerations, and then finally, steps in a conservation transaction, and then we will have a time for questions, but you can ask questions at any time.
Sorry, are we going to get a copy of this?
I can share a copy.
I mean, just in case,
Yeah,
if
that
it-
would be great
you know,
Sure.
if we could.
Mhm.
Okay,
for reference.
thanks.
I will send it to Jason so that he can distribute it. So first, when we're looking at a conservation project, there are two different types of protection that we look at, and one is fee simple acquisition, and that is when a municipality or a land trust, and in this case, I changed to using the term applicant because that's what we used in the application and the program manual so far. So that is when the applicant acquires ownership of a property. And a conservation easement is when the landowner retains ownership of the property, but an easement holder acquires development rights via limiting certain uses of the land to preserve the conservation values of the property. So in fee simple acquisition, that can be acquired through a traditional sale or a partial or full donation. So a partial or full donation, obviously a full donation is they're donating the value of the land. A partial donation, also called a bargain sale, is when they might donate a portion of that value. So say it's a $100,000 property, or it appraised at $100,000, and they're willing to donate 50% of that. So they're donating $50,000 worth of that value, and then the applicant has to find the other 50% in funding.
Do they get a tax break then, when they're doing it, with the way you have it
Yes.
drawn up? Tax break is there.
Yeah, unless it's changed, I think the IRS will allow the person donating over a 5-year period to take a donation on their taxes.
And then with the conservation I think I took that part out of here because that's more for landowners than it is for what we're talking about. But in a conservation easement, that is extended from 5 years out to 15 years that you can take that. So if you have a very expensive property that you're donating the value on, but you don't have enough enough income to offset that, you have a longer period of time to take advantage of that.
Did you say 15 or 50?
15. Or depending on how you count, it's 6 and 16 or 5 and 15, depends on whether you count that first year or not. With a fee simple acquisition, there may be some funder restrictions. For example, DCNR has a deed restriction that they put on, and in the program that we're putting together, one of the things that we need to talk about is if there's going to be a deed restriction or some other form of restriction that goes along with the land. And then finally, the applicant can retain the property, or they may transfer the property to another conservation organization. Wildlands does a lot, and other land trusts do a lot of projects where we will work with, say, the Game Commission or State Forest or State Parks to acquire a piece of property, and then we will transfer it to them. We call it, different organizations call it something slightly different. We call it a simultaneous closing. So we basically own it for just a few minutes, and then it's transferred to the end holder, which could be, like I said, State Park, State Forest, Game Commission, Fish and Wildlife Service. Conservation easements. A conservation easement is a legal agreement between a landowner and a land trust, and it's important to know that it continues in perpetuity. The land trust holds the interest in the property while the landowner continues to own the property. And the restrictions are designed to protect the conservation values of each specific property. So an easement document is tailored to that specific project and the conservation values of that property. And then the land trust is obligated to ensure that the conditions of the easement are being met in perpetuity. So they must monitor and maintain that easement forever. And then easements run with the land, binding all future owners to comply with the easement. So if one landowner puts an easement on his property, when he sells his property, the new landowner, that easement is still there because the land trust holds that easement, so they hold that bundle of rights. So that's how it passes from one owner to the next.
Don, you mind me just bringing up then that I know for land trusts, there's a stewardship endowment that really what usually comes out of the landowner's profit?
I
When you
think
negotiate.
that might be later on in the presentation. If
Oh,
it
I'm
is
sorry.
not, because again, I did cut this presentation down because I didn't want it to be too long, point that out again when we get to that point.
Okay.
But continuing to talk about easements, so Wildlands Conservancy and many other Pennsylvania land trusts use the We Conserve PA model document to draft our easements. It's the preferred model for a number of funders, including DCNR. And not only that, but Pennsylvania is kind of a leader in this field, and lots of other states have kind of used the Pennsylvania model, made changes to conform to their state laws, but it's been being used elsewhere as well. The model grants of conservation easement and declaration of covenants and its extensive commentary documents together provide users with a state-of-the-art legal document and guidance to customize it to nearly any situation. The model, which was first published in 2005, is informed by many years of regular and heavy use by land trusts, governments, and landowners across Pennsylvania and across the nation. The model is currently in its 7th edition, and I think the most recent version of the 7th edition just came out last month. One thing I do want to point out about the model easements, because we're not going to get into the weeds about the easement itself, but something that you want to take into account as we're talking about some of the due diligence items, is that the model easement describes the resources that you wish to protect and how the easement will work to preserve different resources within the different protection areas of the property. So the model easement contains 3 potential protection areas: the highest protection, the standard protection, and the minimal protection. And these protection areas are shown on the easement plan, which was recorded with the easement document. So the highest protection area is where, obviously you want the highest level of protection, but there's very little that can happen within that area because you're trying to protect the conservation values there. Standard protection is normally what we put on areas that are, you can have a little bit more activity. So if it's a farm field, or if you are doing more intensive things on that portion of the property, and that would be under standard protection area. And then minimal protection area is what we normally put around the residence and other accessory buildings. And the main point of the minimal protection area is to make sure that nothing that happens within that area adversely affects the rest of the easement. So that is slightly different than an agricultural easement, because you cut out around the house, don't you? Oh, you don't? Okay, I get, that must be a Lehigh Valley thing. In the Lehigh Valley, they just cut out the area around the house. But I guess, in an ag easement, do you call it something different? The area? Do you mark out the area or no? No? Okay, cool. So, due diligence. Due diligence is the reasonable steps taken by a person in order to satisfy a legal requirement, especially in buying or selling something. And it comes from law and business. So the due diligence that goes along with a land protection project include things like the appraisal, the title. With the title, one of the things that you need to know specifically when you're doing a conservation project are whether or not there are any mortgages or liens. And that's especially important when you are looking at conservation easement, because you can't put an easement on a property that has a mortgage or a lien, because if it gets foreclosed upon, it could extinguish the easement. Getting down into the weeds, I'll stop going in the weeds. And then another thing is the survey. So you need a boundary survey of what you're acquiring. And if it's a conservation easement, I mentioned those protection areas, and this is where that comes into play. So if you're doing a conservation easement, the survey for that would be also need to show on the ground and in the survey where those protection area boundaries are. Oh, to jump back up to the appraisal for fee land and for conservation easement are different. Fee land is probably what you're more familiar with for, you're appraising the value. Generally, you're looking at comparables that have sold in the area of similar lands and they're adjusting to get the fee value of the property. With a conservation easement appraisal, you do that step, and then they're also looking at comparables of property that is that is protected by an easement, and they get a value for that. And so it's the subtraction of the easement protected value from the fee value that gets to the point of the easement value. That is also why a conservation easement appraisal may possibly be a little bit more expensive than a fee appraisal. Another thing that is part of the due diligence is the environmental site assessment, and I believe that that's a question that came up at the last meeting. Generally, land trusts always get phase one environmental site assessment for properties that we're acquiring. We follow land trust standards and practices, and it's always recommended that you do some sort of environmental assessment. The easiest, cleanest way to do that is to get a phase one environmental assessment. Grant funders like DCNR, they don't require that, but if you do get one, they ask that you share that information with them. And the point of getting the site assessment is because you don't want to buy a property that has some sort of contamination issues on it. An issue that frequently comes up when you're buying a property is there could be an underground storage tank. So if there is, sometimes they'll if they find an underground storage tank, sometimes you'll have to do what's called a phase two environmental assessment, where they do soil testing to see if there's an issue, or they may just decide to remove and remediate the underground storage tank. That's one of the things. So they're looking at what's on the property, and they're also looking at like what is in the area of the property that could affect the property, which is obviously, when you think about Palmerton Zinc, that affected a lot of properties around here.
Also looking at the history of uses on the property?
Yes. Yep.
Yes, when we preserved old scout camps, there were rifle and pistol ranges, so the whole lead abatement thing comes into play.
And so, I know, what exactly was the question last time, whether or not that was something that should be?
The one that asked it, so let Jerry.
It was about biosolids being spread on the fields with that. PFAs, the forever chemicals. They're there forever and they're in the soil, so they can get into the groundwater. And I want to know if they checked for that.
That would be something that I think that would fall under what you said, the uses of the property, when they're looking at the uses of the property. Because they generally don't do soil testing unless there's a reason, because that's a phase two. So actually, like, taking samples would be a phase two. If the phase one reveals that based on history, surrounding uses, or things that they see on the property, that leads them to believe that there could be an issue that they want to test for.
Would that come into play in the future? The people that are applying biosolids to their farms, would they be singled out so that the general public would know who's doing what?
It's not farmland preservation.
Well, we wouldn't be buying ag land with this program.
Yeah, but I mean, the properties next to that would be affected with the groundwater and stuff.
No, because there's a buffer in terms of application boundaries.
That buffer of 150 yards, young lady, doesn't mean squat. When you have groundwater, that could go 30, 40 miles before it resurfaces. So that argument doesn't hold water.
And I can't speak to that. That would really be a question that the environmental consultant would have to answer based on their research. So the next, funding considerations. So when we are looking at acquiring a property, one of the first questions is, okay, where are we gonna get the money? So some of the different options for funding are state grants, PA DCNR. The DCNR grant workshop happened to be this morning, because the next grant round is opening January 16th. Municipal and open space funds, which is what the Carbon County is considered municipal funds because the county is a municipality. Private donations can come from just private citizens or private foundations, private foundation grants. And then also, like I mentioned before, a donation and bargain sale. And also, in some of the conservation easement work that we do, are able to apply to We Conserve PA Conservation Easement Assistance Program. I'm not sure if municipalities, I don't think they're eligible for that. I think it is a land trust program, but basically that allows us to recoup some of the costs up to $8,000 for conservation easement projects.
Dawn, on the municipal open space funding, there's different categories of that, correct? I know Ann is involved with municipalities down more towards Philadelphia with
In,
Herndon.
yeah, in this case, the municipal funding in place is the county's bond, $10 million bond, not all of which will go to this, but a municipality, a township, or a borough can also go through a process to either to pass a referendum and have either a bond or an earned income tax. I know in Monroe County, quite a few municipalities, I know Chestnut Hill Township, for example, has a local earned income tax. So they match their own money with state money.
So they were really able
buy
to
park
leverage,
land. Yeah.
back when the Monroe County Open Space Program was going, if a local township or borough had an EIT or some sort of local open space funding, so they've got their local funding, the county funding, and DCNR funding, and other, state funding and federal funding that you could go after. So you can really, in those cases, you can really leverage your funding.
I wanted that to come up because down the road for this board, once we're all set up, whether we have some type of town hall meeting to announce the program and engage municipalities, I don't think there's any of the 23 municipalities in the county that have the earned income tax. But this may spur on that question in the future that municipalities would want to have their own funding source, and which could be a great benefit looking long-term down the road.
Because not only is that just like this open space bond, the open space referendum, a lot of municipalities that do that can use it for open space and also for ag, so they can do more ag programs that maybe they wouldn't normally be able to do because they have that extra funding, and the restrictions are slightly different for local funds than they are for state funds.
Is that the program that Northampton has in place right now?
Yeah, a number of municipalities in Northampton and Lehigh County have local open space funding that they can
Also, if
apply.
you purchase a property with a local, open space funding. So if a township has their own funding and uses their money to buy a park, up to 25% of that can be used to maintain the park too. So you have a lot more ability to leverage local money too.
So I have a question. So what would be the process for getting municipalities involved in that? I think that should be a priority for us.
Yeah, I think the first step is to get this program up and running, and then, yes, I agree that trying to get the word out that there is, that you can better leverage your money if you do a local program.
I just don't want to see this get established and then it takes another year or more to get it established in municipalities.
It will.
tax structure whatsoever.
Now it's
Well,
possible that
to
a
minimize the time as much as possible.
It's similar to the county.
Good luck. And we're gonna make you the
And just like
spokesperson.
you mentioned about having a town hall meeting, so after we get this all figured out, then we have to have,
No,
okay.
no, this was just an idea.
Oh, okay.
This is a brand new program, and how do we let the municipalities and the public know about it? And it was
That
just
would
kind
be a
of
way, true.
it was just kind of like my idea, of announcing that. But going back to your question, And again, this has been a challenge to get municipalities to go to training for the Pennsylvania Association of Township Supervisors and Boroughs. There's all this technical assistance out there if they take the time to do it. And so I'm sure there would be resources, and even with Department of Community and Economic Development, there's a regional planner. They could explain what this is, but it's gonna be
And I
it's
think,
gonna be a whole education process.
yeah, and that's, once the program is put together, then the next step is how do we get the word out? And so I think I would imagine that's something that at this level would be discussed moving forward.
Dawn, could we break for a second and introduce Anika?
Oh, it's all right.
Of course.
Anika, you wanna tell us a little about yourself?
Good evening, I'm Anika Atkinson. I am with the National Audubon Society, their Mid-Atlantic office, and I'm the director of the Delaware River Watershed Program.
So you may recall that Jeannie Ortiz was the previous representative from Audubon, and we're grateful that Anika is now joining us to work on this project.
Thanks for making it.
Anika, how do you spell her name? Aneca. And your last name? Atkinson, Atkinson.
So in terms of funding considerations, you don't just have to consider where you're going to get your matching funds from. You also have to consider your project costs. So how much is the land or the easement going to cost? What are the transaction costs? And the transaction costs include those due diligence items that we already discussed, as well as closing costs, legal costs, things like that. And then here's where we come to what Dennis was asking about earlier, which is a stewardship endowment. When a land trust acquires a property, we always are looking for a stewardship endowment. So if we're getting a piece of property in fee that's going to be a nature preserve, we need funding in order to manage and maintain that nature preserve. And that's where the stewardship endowment comes in. And then equally as important is if it's a conservation easement, the land trust needs an endowment to make sure that we have money moving forward, because we are tasked with monitoring and managing that easement in perpetuity. So we have endowment calculators. Sometimes it's a little bit different if you are a municipality. I'm not sure if I don't think they can have like an endowment fund necessarily, but
They have a revenue stream called taxes.
Yes.
And they have staff to take care of parks. They're nearly always buying parkland.
But generally, the stewardship endowment is not something that can be covered by grant funds. And so that is, like Dennis mentioned before, a lot of times when you're talking with a landowner about protecting their property and you're telling them about the different costs and what can and can't be covered by grants, one of the things that can't be covered by grants but still needs to be paid for is the stewardship endowment. So in many cases, when we're working with a landowner, they're paid for their property and then they do a donation back to us to cover the stewardship endowment.
Can I just mention that this is why the conservancies, many times, when they help buy a piece of land, they don't retain ownership. They'll transfer it to the Game Commission, the state parks, the state forests, because those agencies have the funding to do the stewardship. And I don't know if you have to raise the stewardship when you flip it over to those agencies or not, but
No, they don't require stewardship, it gets
They have their
incorporated
funding
into their
stream
budgets.
that helps
Yeah.
them do the stewardship. But if it's an easement, for instance, that the Conservancy is going to have to go out and inspect every year, the Conservancy is gonna need staff to do that. They're gonna need an endowment to help pay for that staff that goes out and inspects the land and so forth.
And that's why these conservation easements are a lot more complicated, and what Don explained with that 7th edition of the We Conserve PA, that legal document has been massaged a million times over to pass muster, and it's a requirement by a land trust to do the stewardship in perpetuity. And we even have a partnership with another land trust that if we disappear, somebody else will take that over. So it's a very legal, long-term process that is that is tied in.
And that's why they call the buying it fee simple, because it's a lot simpler.
And ECNR would rather you buy it than put an easement on it.
And then the other thing you have to think about as a municipality or a land trust is, do you have the staff time and the financial wherewithal to cover the staff time to do a project? Because staff time is also something that generally is not covered by grants, except for with the land trust, you can get staff time from that Conservation Easement Assistance Program grant.
So Dawn, would we have to, in this program, develop, if a municipality was doing a conservation easement, as to the legal document that would bind them to do the stewardship that a land trust would do?
So you might have noticed in the program manual that I did mention that it is highly recommended that a municipality work with the land trust if they're going to do a conservation easement to avoid that issue. So either they co-hold the easements with the land trust, or the land trust holds the easements, just because of the issue with turnover in municipalities. You don't want that to cause an easement not to be monitored and managed, and, you know, somebody finds it 5 years later and it's like, oh no, look, we have this easement, they go out and who knows what could have happened. So that's one of the recommendations in the manual that we can talk more about when we get to that, is the idea that it's probably good to have a land trust involved if a municipality wants to put an easement on a property.
But but under the Internal Revenue Service Code, 501c3 land conservancy or a municipality have the legal ability
Yes.
to hold, and obligation then if they hold it, can hold a conservation easement. Those are the only two entities that can hold a conservation easement.
And in some cases, if a municipality is the only holder and not a co-holder, they will contract a land trust
Yeah.
to monitor the easements for them. So there's a whole kind of array of what that relationship should be, or could be. But
Sounds like a big piece of spaghetti.
in the end, a municipality can hold and monitor the easement themselves legally. It's just that through time, it's kind of recommended that they work with a land trust. Yes?
Our neighboring counties, do the municipalities most likely, are they all involved with this type of program?
I work a lot in Moore Township in Northampton County, and they have their own local funding, and so they contract with both us and Heritage Conservancy to put easements on some of their property. So it goes, the application is made to the township, they rank the applications, and then we'll pass it on to myself or someone from Heritage, and then we will go through the process of acquiring the easements, and the township will pay for everything. But then we hold the easement. In Northampton County, they do a millage freeze. Now we're really getting into the weeds. So they'll freeze the millage on protected properties as long as all of the entities, the county, the municipality, and the school district, all the taxing entities agree. And so at the time the easement goes on, the millage is frozen at that level. And in order for that to happen, the municipality has to have an interest in the property, so they become a co-holder of the easement.
I don't think any township in school does anything like that.
Okay. So, let's talk about the Carbon County Open Space Program and how a conservation project, the steps in the conservation project. So to start, the applicant would submit an open space application to the county. Obviously, that is very simplified because in theory, it would kind of be, there'd be a lot of interaction back and forth to create good projects, to help municipalities or land trusts come up with good projects. But in general, the applicant submits the application to the county, and then this body, the Open Space Advisory Board, will review and rank the applications and make funding recommendations to the county commissioners. So, there's a number of steps in a conservation transaction, and it's important to note that a project may take from 12 to 36 months to complete, depending on the complexity of the project and the funding and due diligence needed. Some projects can take even longer. But 12 months
won't
is,
talk about that.
12 months is a really quick one. But the first step is a landowner meeting and a site visit to determine the conservation goals of the landowner and the conservation values of the property. Once both parties are committed to moving forward, an appraisal of the property and/or the conservation easement would be performed. And again, this is just like the general high-level overview. There's lots of details and nuance in all of this. Once the appraisal is completed, we need to determine the applicant, how and where the funding for the project will come from, and then agree on the terms of the sale via sales agreement or a donation agreement if the property is being donated. And when Wildlands does a project, we usually add in a funding contingency and a board approval contingency into our sales agreement. That way, we can move forward to signing the sales agreement before we go through the whole process of getting our board to approve the project. I'm not sure, municipalities I don't know if we can, I don't know if it's outside of the purview of the board to try and recommend something like that, or if they can do something like that, or if they have to go through a different
Our
process.
municipalities are approving when they're putting their money into the deal, they're approving contingent on the remaining funding
Gotcha.
coming through. Because otherwise they'd be liable for all of it.
Dawn, is it in all cases that all entities do not go above fair market value?
So generally, generally the idea is that the appraised value is the fair market value, and you're not going to get grant funding above the fair market value. There are specific instances where land trusts might pay more, but generally those are really far and few between. Same for a municipality, and they need to check all of their legislation to make sure, to see if they can do something like that. But I think generally, the appraised value is what you are able to go after grants for and able to pay for a project. So and I'm not sure if what Dennis is getting at is that, or the idea that a landowner might think their property is worth a lot, but the appraisal comes back and, looking at the comparables, and it does not appraise for anywhere near what the landowner might think it's worth.
Well, I guess the one legal question for the county is, whatever the county code says for a sixth-class county, whether they could pay above fair market value or not, and does that then apply to the whole $10 million bond? I guess that's.
Well,
that's
the other
gonna be question.
thing to consider, I think the county could make a recommendation, but they're only kicking in 50%, so technically they would never be paying more than appraised value.
One of many legal questions.
Yes. You'll see as as we get to looking at the manual, that there's going to be a lot of things that are more like legally type things that we're going to have to kind of say what we would like to see generally, and it probably will have to go through the county solicitor to make sure that it's all legally kosher.
With the agricultural program, we will never pay over the appraised value. You can pay under it, below it, if that's what the board decides, but never above it.
But you're also you can pay up to appraised value, as opposed to this program would only pay up to 50% of the project cost in theory. So going back to, once the appraisal is completed, like I said, you need to, so the other thing that we tell landowners a lot is we're gonna get an appraisal, and then based on that appraisal and what that comes in at, we need to look at what are the funding sources and how much of that value can we bring to the table, because we might only be able to find funding to get up to 80% of that appraised value. So then that's asking them to do some sort of bargain sale, some sort of donation. And so these are kind of the negotiations if you can't get up to that full amount, and that's usually a conversation you have pretty early on, maybe even before you get to the appraisal stage. These are things that you're thinking about as a land trust that's talking to somebody who wants to preserve their property is, we think we can only bring 50% of the property value to the table. Is that something that you're still interested in or not? Because, like was mentioned, there are tax benefits to donating some of the value of a project as well. So in many cases, we will tell a landowner that, you should talk to a financial advisor or a tax attorney to see what works best for your specific circumstances, if that's something you could consider doing.
But I guess, Don, in the manual, we're gonna have to decide if we're saying we would go up to 50%, if we review an if the board reviews an application and it's a good one, does the board, or would the county commit up to 50% contingent upon, the rest of it coming, or a deal?
I mean, DCNR is 50% of appraised.
So I'm just wondering, and that's gonna be a timing issue, I guess, in the manual. Would this board recommend approving a project contingent upon the rest of the money coming in?
Yeah, that's just another one of the many list of details we need to figure out in terms of.
That was in the ranking though, the ability to leverage more money, so that's kind of,
Right.
sort of part and parcel to it, I guess.
Yeah, the pending versus secured idea. Okay, so once a project is moving forward, from Wildland's perspective, we would go through our internal approval process to obtain board approval for the project. And in the case of municipality, like I mentioned, that might have to happen before the sales agreement. And then begins the process of actually seeking the grants and funding for the project. And then finally, once you know that the funding is in place for a project, that's when at least that's when I wait until all the money's in place before I start doing the due diligence, because you don't want to start paying out money until you know you have the money to pay for it and that you're going to be reimbursed for that. So once we know the funding's in place for a project, we start working on the required due diligence items such as title work, environmental assessment, and survey. And one other little thing is that depending on the title work is something that in the beginning, you might want to do your own preliminary title work by, looking up the deeds at the county. And generally, because you can do that online a lot of the times, that's a pretty simple thing, just to make sure that you're talking to the person that actually can sell the property. Because the last thing you want is to come to an agreement with somebody and then find out that they actually don't have the legal right to do what they are saying they want to do. So whenever there's a question about that sort of thing, that would be an instance where you might want to do your title work a little bit earlier. Now,
For Dawn and Ann, in other county programs, do they have separate legal support that does the review on these things for the board, that the board has a separate solicitor? Do you know?
I don't believe Chester County does. When they set up the initial program, they may have consulted with outside, I'm thinking Pat Bregman, to get the initial documents in place in the early 90s. But they have standard agreements. And
I think Dennis is
or
talking
client-
about, so when you get to the point later in the process where you are submitting your documents to the county, like your title, your survey, your phase 1 to the county, who reviews them at the county level?
Yeah, and if this program would get busy for timely reviews, it's a question down the road, I guess.
We should be writing all of these questions down.
I
They're all things that we need to get
Just for the
into at
record,
some point.
advisory
Brandon,
boards.
this is recorded, right?
It's recorded, it's
So
streamed on Facebook,
we'll
so.
be able to go back in and watch this whole meeting with any comments or anything that came up.
Commissioners on funding of doing that, so.
Yeah.
How you doing, Fred?
So the next step is, if this is a conservation easement project, you also, aside from the other due diligence, you also need to be drafting and finalizing the conservation easement and creating what's called a baseline documentation report, and that is something that is done with every conservation easement and referenced in the conservation easement. And that is a report that shows the current conditions of the property, so that in the future, you can always go back to it and see what was there, so somebody can't claim, oh, that house was always there. And then finally, when all the due diligence is completed and the funding is in hand from the funders, the deed can be drafted, including all the required funder language, so funder deed restrictions, and you can move forward with settlement on the property. And then post-settlement, there is almost always things that need to be done post-settlement, like closing out different grants and requirements, requesting reimbursements for money that you don't get up front. If it was a donation, you need to send out an acknowledgement letter of that donation. So there's a number of different things that many times need to be taken care of following settlements. So unfortunately, it's not settlement, yeah, everything's done. In some cases, some of those items can take a long time. But generally, that's not the case. Generally, within a few months after closing, you're able to wrap up all of those things. So that is the kind of quick overview, and I know we kind of went into the weeds a little bit on different things, but does anybody have any general questions of how projects work?
The due diligence part,
Yes.
what falls under our purview, the county? Is it a blend? Is it all covered under the process that they go through, the checklists, or, I mean?
So yeah, there's a checklist of all the due diligence that you have to do, and that it would be required by DCNR or by the county.
But the applicant
Yes.
is performing those
That's- yes.
tasks. You're checking off that they've submitted them, but you're not
We're
responsible
not
for
looking
doing.
No.
at things and doing all, that's what I meant. It's all gonna be covered
No,
under the
again,
process.
Yeah, the board is reviewing and ranking the applications and making recommendations. A lot of those, the detailed review of other things, like after the fact, putting together the grant agreement, making sure that the applicant or awardee now is following all the steps they need to follow before they get a project. All of that happens at the county inside the planning department. That is not something that the advisory board has to deal with. You are a review and recommending body.
A go or no go?
But yes, all of those due diligence items are the responsibility of the applicant. And so one thing that is mentioned in the appraisal policy, I think, is that the other thing that is important for an applicant to know is that you can't have a landowner bring you an appraisal and say, here's my appraisal, this is how much I want for the property. The appraisal must be in the name of the applicant, and it must have the county or any other funding entities listed as approved users of the appraisal.
Don,
Yes.
let me make this a little bit easier. Say I own woodland with an ice stream going through, and I want to preserve my property. What is the step that I would take as the landowner?
So, you would call you, or as the landowner, you could reach out to your municipality, your local land trust, or the county, who could then put you in touch with a municipality or local land trust. And then that municipality or land trust would, then that's what starts the process here of the landowner meeting and site visit to figure out, so, you want to put an easement on it, or do you want to sell it?
We're just gonna say easement to make it simpler.
To make it more confusing.
Yeah, to make it more confusing, because that's the more,
Well, so yeah, the
longest
first question is, what are the goals, your conservation goals? And do you want to sell it outright, or do you want to put an easement on it? And then if you want to put an easement on it, I would tell you all about what an easement is and how it works. And then how this program works and how the funding works. So not necessarily this program, but a general idea of the steps that have to occur in order for this to happen. If you're like, yeah, that sounds great, let's move forward. We've talked about, potential we're both on the same page with how much we think it's worth, generally. We might not know exactly, but generally, you're not saying it's worth $1 million, and I'm like, whoa, your 10 acres is not worth $1 million. So generally, you know, you're on the same page. Everybody has reasonable expectations. Let's put it that way. And so you decide, yeah, I want to move forward. So then if it's an easement, there are a couple of steps. I always like to put together an easement plan. We've talked through any major things that might be in the easement that could affect the appraised value. And then we will go out and get an appraisal. When the appraisal comes back, I'll sit down with you and show you the appraisal. Now, different organizations have different ways of doing this. In some cases, they will share appraisals. Generally at Wildlands, if I'm working with the landowner, I'll share the appraisal. There are very few instances where I will not, and I will just make an offer. But some organizations, I think TNC is probably one, in the past, they make an offer. They do not necessarily share the appraised value.
That's the major concern.
But anyway, so I would share the appraisal with you, tell you based on that appraisal how much funding we think we can bring to the table. And then if you think that sounds great, then we'll work to put together an agreement, a legal agreement of sale. And once we have that, you know, and during this time, I'm talking to you at the county with your other hat or whoever, or Jason, let's say it's Jason. I'm talking to Jason saying, hey, we have this project. We think it's great. I just want to let you know that we're thinking of moving forward. Now, if I was a municipality and new to this, I would probably, you know, pull Jason in sooner just to make sure it was a good project. But I think from a land trust, just because we do this all the time, we have a general idea whether it's a project that can be funded or not. But yeah, so you would bring your different funders. You know, I'd contact, if I wanted DCNR funding, I'd reach out to my regional advisor at DCNR and be like, hey, here's the project. Come out and see it. Anyway, so then we would put together the application. One of the other things in reviewing the application is we needed to talk about whether or not the Open Space Advisory Board would do site visits. Whether it would just be the Open Space Coordinator doing a site visit, or would it be the Open Space Advisory Board members doing a site visit? In Monroe County, the Open Space Advisory Board members, we would get together, I think they rented a van or something, and we would go out and do site visits on all the applicant properties. So that's something to think about, like how do you want that to work? Anyway, the project is reviewed, it's all funded, and then I come back to you, I'm like, okay, the project's funded, we're gonna move forward on the due diligence. I've hired so-and-so, they're gonna come out on this day to do this. And we would sit down and talk through the easements back and forth. You would get your own legal counsel if you wanted them to review it. That's not required, but that is, you know, certainly your prerogative to do that. Because you cannot rely on the land trust or the municipality for legal advice or financial advice. And then once all the due diligence came back and was completed and we had the funding ready to go, we check all the boxes for our funders. So like DCNR, I have to send certain things in before they send me chunks of money. And then I get an approval to close. And the county, I assume, would also give me, once I've given them all the documentation, approval to close. And then we can set up for closing and put the easement on your property. And then that document is recorded at the county.
So in other words, this board here could recommend a parcel. But in the end, after all the i's and t's are crossed, the county commissioners could nix the whole deal,
Yes.
correct?
But it would happen at the grant agreement stage. So you guys recommend a property, or a project be funded. That gets sent up to the commissioners. I've never been at a meeting between the open space coordinator and the commissioners to see exactly how that works, but the commissioners would either approve or if they had questions. But let's just say the commissioners approve it, then the grant agreement gets executed.
And what's the estimated time of completion on a parcel that is selected? what's the average?
That all depends.
Because you use so many variables up there.
Yes, I mean, like I said, the best case scenario, you're talking,
Conversation's sake.
yeah, best case scenario, you're talking 12 months. But generally, I tell people 18 to 24 when we're going after grants, but it could be longer than that depending on if there's hiccups or
That's not
negotiation
after it
takes a
came
long
here.
time.
That's not after it came here.
That's total.
That's before it came here.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's important for you to know that almost all of what Don talked about happens but with somebody else. It's not what this board does. We're just trying to make you understand the whole process. Because you should know the whole process.
Exactly. Before we move into the application and the manual, I wanted to make sure that everybody understood, like, what does this look like as a whole, and then where do you fit in? But it's important you know the whole, because we're in this manual, we're determining some of those things which determine the whole.
Hopefully, this part here could just take a couple of months,
Yeah.
three months or something like that, because this board has to receive it, this board has to review it, this board has to recommend it to commissioners. Well, maybe they don't have another meeting for a month, or whatever, that they're gonna look at it, and so
And once
it
the
takes a little time.
once the commissioners approve it and the grant agreement is executed, then the applicant, unless timing's perfect, all the grants aren't executed, if the grant agreements aren't executed at the same time, so there might be a lag until they have the project fully funded. And then at that point, they still have to go through all of the due diligence and everything else.
I think it's really important, though, to understand if first, if I'm offering a property, I need to have a conservation interest. But let's say I'm also talking to a developer. That process with a developer takes more than 18 months to 3 years these days. And there will be contingencies in that developer's agreement, like I have to be able to subdivide your property into 100 lots, and I'm gonna give you $50,000 up front, but you're not gonna see the majority of your money until I've sold 60% of my homes. So, I mean, we're actually in the process of helping a township buy a property, and that landowner has worked with a developer for 8 years. The terms of the agreement weren't met, so the owner walked away from 8 years working with the developer, and now they're in a process that will take 18 to 24 months. It won't take longer than that, but we're at almost the 1-year point, and there will be a partial settlement because it's complicated. Part of it is an easement and part of it is a park. The easement is all lined up and we're ready to go to settlement before year end, so he'll get the money for the easement. And then the money for the park, we're waiting for county and state and a local referendum to finish, and that's gonna take another 8 to 10 months.
It's a process.
Yeah.
And if it's an individual, it's simpler, and Dawn has dealt with some that it's, it's in a family estate, and you gotta get everybody's signature and agreement, and that all.
And
takes
that's
time.
not your
Can,
problem. You're there to review the application,
Right.
rate it, and make your recommendation that month so it can keep going.
Brett has questions.
You just touched on something there, you said in the state. Can this group here recommend a parcel that's in a trust and buy it?
You're not recommending anyone, you're reacting to applications.
You're reviewing an application that's coming.
You as an individual could talk to people
Yeah.
and try to get something going, but this board doesn't have that function.
No, I mean, but the overall group there, can they purchase something that's in a trust? That's my question to you.
You're
Like
waiting
the
for an
Land
application.
Preservation
An
Board.
applicant can be a trust, he's asking, right? You're asking
Well,
if a
I'm
trust.
asking that, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not making myself very clear.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a in the weeds question, but you said the county's gonna be acting as a municipality, right? So,
I didn't make myself
when-
very clear.
Well, I just said a county
I-
is a municipality technically, but
so my question is, let's say an adjacent municipality,
So they can too.
county, decides that a piece of land that's adjoining our county,
uh-oh.
Well, go ahead.
Keep going.
Keep going.
isn't good for them to preserve. Can we, as a entity, cross boundaries in order to get adjacent land, even if it's not within our municipality?
I would say,
I'm talking about, well, I'm talking about locally too, so let's say
No, but that
Franklin
may be,
Township.
that may come down to, no, that may come down to a political question that the county commissioners are feeling politically obligated, that this is county bond money coming out of county tax dollars, and they may say, we will contribute X number of dollars for the portion of that tract that is in the county. And the rest of it has to come from somewhere else.
Because I'm sure there's land that crosses municipal lines that.
Yeah.
I believe that would trigger like a fair share requirement. Basically, depending on what the percentage is based on the acreage, it would trigger a fair share. That's how other programs have worked.
And I'm thinking like even like Franklin Township, I'm a supervisor in Franklin Township, so I know that there's land within our municipality that isn't even owned by us, it's the Hayden Borough owns a portion of land along a part of our area. So let's say the borough's like, you know, we would want to acquire that under like a program like this, even though it's not our land, like in our municipality, so to speak.
You know, there's a buyer and a seller, so even if it's two different municipalities, you're still having the same legal agreements.
I did have a question on the appraisal policy, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in farmland preservation, if you don't agree with the appraisal, you can get a secondary appraisal that you pay for, right?
Right.
I don't see that in this.
that is because the county isn't the one that's buying the land,
Okay.
it's the applicant. So if the municipality or the land trust that's really up to them, whether or not they want to do it that way or not. But when it comes down to it, the grant funders are only going to look at an appraisal that is in their name, not in the landowner's name.
Okay. Because that was just my question on, that's how that other program works. If you don't agree with the valuation, you can pay for it and then argue the valuation and the difference between, but.
Yeah, that is different because it is, completely different program.
We will not look at an appraisal done by.
Don, correct me if I'm wrong, but the open space, what we have here is basically a grant program.
Yep.
The farmland preservation program is where the county's actually buying it. We are the land trust. Here, this board is just saying, here's the money as long as you could show us that you did everything right. Kind of like, this board's gonna be like the state is with the farmland preservation program, where they sit on the sideline and they just say, you got everything, show me everything, and here's your money.
I think that'll be a
Would that be the
misconception
best
of
way
folks
to
who have
explain it?
an understanding of that
Yeah.
program and look at this and go, well, wait a minute, I can't object. So it's an
Well, again,
education piece.
and that's something that would need to be discussed between the applicant and the landowner. So between the municipality or the land trust and the landowner, that's something that needs to be discussed. And if they're not familiar with the ag program, they would have no way of knowing that that's a thing. Should I come sit down and turn this off? Do I need to do something special here?
Yeah, let's say goodbye.
Great job, Dawn.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot.
Well, it's giving you all the pieces
There's a lot to know here.
because, yeah, because when we put the program manual together, this board is gonna be recommending that to the commissioner, so it's kind of the once over the world, but.
A lot to comprehend.
So we're at 8.
Yeah, so the question is, the next thing on the agenda is discussion of the draft application and manual. Does it make more sense to look at the application or the manual first?
I think the application is enough to bite off and chew on tonight.
Okay.
I think the manual could be next meeting.
Homework, reading.
Yeah,
For all in some.
that's my opinion, but what do the others think?
That's good, I agree.
So let's start looking at the draft application, which which is titled Carbon County Open Space Grant Application. So in creating this, I looked at other counties and their applications and what kind of was important in knowing what kind of is important information for that the grantor might need to know about the applicants in the project. So first, it's important to note that you have the applicant information, which would be any of the eligible applicants, which is a municipality or a land trust. And then you also have a contact person. So if you're, like with a DCNR grant, you have the applicants and you have the,
Local project coordinator.
yes, you have the local project person. So they could be one in this, I mean, you need to have a person to talk to, whether that person is at the municipality or somebody representing the municipality for the grant. That's where you need the contact information for that person. We need a project name so that we can refer to the project, and everybody knows what project we're talking about. It's important for the board to know, is it a fee simple acquisition or a conservation easement? Please note that, none of the fillable stuff has been put in here yet, because we don't know yet if this is going to be like an online PDF that people can fill out and then email, or if it's gonna be like a web form, or exactly what it's gonna be yet. So right now, it's just the words without the form part.
That would be like a checkbox behind one of
Yes.
those. You'd have to check one or the other.
Yes, there will be checks. And then project location and information. So what municipality is it in, or municipalities? What is the street address of the project? What are the tax parcel IDs? What is the total property acres? And what are the acres to be protected if it is different? And so that is something like with a conservation easement. What if they're only interested in putting an easement on a portion of their property instead of the whole thing? And then also, who is the current property owner? So that, all of this information allows the county open space coordinator to look up this property and kind of double check all the information. So then the next thing is the total project cost and the county funding request. And those are both on this front page, but you need to go further down in the application to figure that information out. But the front page is like all of the main information on the first page. So talking about project cost, we then go into the project financials, and so this is where you will figure out the information to fill in the last two. So first, you need to know the appraised value of the property. An appraisal must be submitted as part of the application materials. I can foresee that there could be maybe an instance where the appraisal's not quite done yet. But I didn't want to put that in here, so that is a conversation that would kind of be at the, whoever the county program coordinator is, that might be kind of at their discretion, whether or not they would allow for that if like the appraisal is just about ready.
And it has to be within the 12 months, which is in that policy, so
Yeah,
it's gotta be
so-
a fresh.
The appraisal itself, all the information having to do with the appraisal, there's a whole appraisal policy for that.
Who does the appraisals? Do we have like said people in our county or?
You, in theory, I suppose, we could put together a list of appraisers for the folks. But generally, you need to find an appraiser that meets the requirements of the policy. So general real estate appraiser.
It's in the policy, and there are folks out there that we use all the time, and it's just like Dave having a list of consulting engineering firms that we would send the bid out to.
So we do have a list that if somebody would be interested.
We don't
We
yet.
don't
but-
need it.
But,
Because somebody else is doing all this. We don't
Okay,
need it. We're just looking at what the
Okay.
appraiser submitted.
very cool.
But in theory, because, you want the program to be
Staff.
successful, the county staff, we could put together like a list of local appraisals that say, you could use somebody on this list or you could use somebody else, but they do still need to meet the requirements of the appraisal policy. So then is the project budget, and if anyone's done a DCNR grant before, this may look familiar to you, because in looking at all sorts of application budgets, some of them can get very confusing. But I think that DCNR does a good job of making it seem rather straightforward. So this is very similar to a DCNR financial spreadsheet, budget spreadsheet that you will see in a DCNR application. So you have a spot to put in the land or easement purchase amounts. So for instance, if this project was, 2 adjacent properties, I mean, that's one thing we haven't talked about yet is match, and if you could put 2 adjacent properties together in one application, stuff like that, that's something that needs to be figured out. But anyway, first is the land purchase cost and the acreage, and then you need to budget for what the different related expenses will be, so an appraisal, technical review appraisal, the survey, the phase 1, title insurance, closing and recording fees, and these are things that municipalities and land trusts put together all the time when they're doing grant applications.
And this isn't on the board, but if I was an applicant, a smart applicant is going to get the county program manual and get the DCNR guidelines online. And they're gonna be looking at both, because this is gonna be a mesh and a blend of that. That's what applicants should be doing.
And so then this, in theory, will auto-calculate this stuff for you to tell you what are the purchase costs, what are the related expenses costs, what is the total project cost. And then you go into where's the money coming from. So the cash match, do you have another grant? Is that pending? Is it secured? And of course, those are some of the things that factor into our scoring sheet. So you need to figure out how to cover that entire project cost within this project match. And that could include donated land value, and then it will auto-calculate the total match, the total value of donated land, and so then the final total match. And then, based on that, so whole project amount minus the total match tells you how much you're requesting from the county grant. And that should be 50% or less of the project cost. And those are the numbers then that you can punch into that project cost on the page before. So then next, we get into the narrative questions of the project and all the details. So first, general project description, the things that would be important for the board to know about if they're going to be to know more about this project before they think about ranking it. Again, it's the type of acquisition, fee simple conservation easement. Who's going to be the ultimate holder of the fee property or the conservation easement? And do they have the ability to efficiently and properly manage and maintain the site? What is the intended use of the property? Because this program is not meant to buy land for active recreation. The purpose of this program is to conserve land for water and habitat. So the intended use of the property. It's also important for the board to know what is the status of the negotiations with the landowner. Ideally, if it's a ready-to-go project, you have a signed agreement of sale, which you will also be submitting with your application. If you do not, because you're very close and you just haven't had it signed yet, and this happens more often than you would think, but obviously we want ready-to-go projects, but if you're days away from having it signed, you would explain what is the negotiations you have, because as the board, you need to determine, well, is this ready to go or not based on how they describe the negotiations? And then finally, what is the estimated time frame for completion of the project? Because if they think, it needs to conform with the grant timeline. At the same time, when they do get a grant agreement, that grant agreement isn't going to be for 10 years. It's probably going to be for 2 years or 3 years. I think DCNRs are normally for 3 years. So you need to close out the grant within 3 years, or else you would have to either, you would lose the grant or potentially go back and ask for an extension, but you have to have a really good argument for an extension. So then we move into the questions that match up with the criteria. So describe the natural habitat of the project and how much of the project is in natural habitat, acres and percentage. Dan brought up a question earlier, do we want to add any more information into this question so that we have enough information to rank it? So that's something to think about as we move forward. As we're looking at these questions, is there enough, are we asking for the right things in these questions that give us the information that we need, the Open Space Advisory Board, to answer, to rank to do the ranking of the project?
And we mentioned earlier about a potential site visit or looking at photographs or something to get familiar with the property.
So the next question, describe how this project will protect or buffer the following water resources. This is straight from the ranking criteria. Some of these questions are straight from the ranking criteria. But again, we just need to, as we're thinking through this, are these gonna give us the answers that we need to know in order to rank it? Describe how this project will protect areas of known biodiversity or threatened, endangered, or sensitive species. The percentage of the property with native woodlands. How will the project advance county and local plans? Is it consistent with local planning documents? Or is it specifically identified as a priority in a local planning document? Please identify specific recommendations from the plans. So local planning documents can include the county comp plan, municipal planning documents, watershed plans. But ideally, you don't want them just saying, oh yeah, it's consistent with it. You want to know it's consistent with what exactly. So you want them to pull out the quote from the plan so that they're showing that yes, it is consistent. It's not just their opinion that it's consistent. So that the board can say, oh yep, that makes sense.
Dawn, I just have a question about the biodiversity. The county natural heritage inventory is from 2007, I believe. And I know that there's much more current information. Is this something that the county should consider updating, or is there enough online information with the PNDI
In a
that?
perfect world, we'd update it. We tried to get a grant to do that, but we were denied.
Yeah, we did try to. I'm just saying, in the future, if the county determines that up to 5% can be used for admin, do they go ahead and do an
I don't think
update?
that's the money they would use for that. I think it would definitely be worth looking at for grant funding to help fund an update, but I don't think it's something that can come out of, it doesn't make sense, I don't think, for it to come out of this 5% here. But right now, there are plenty, there is the online database where you do the PNDI that you can go in and that will still make things pop. Or if somebody thinks that there's something there, they can find other ways of showing that that is on the property from different online resources or in the field resources to show that. Is the property adjacent to other protected lands? If so, please describe. Now, also be aware that one of the other things that is in the application, is it in? Yeah. Copy of the maps. Okay, maybe it's down here. Part of this we would want a map. There would be a map that comes with this application. I'm not sure if it's referenced someplace or it's something we need to add in. So maybe it's on the checklist or maybe it's in the application. Well, I know I read it, but I was looking at a million different things. But so is the property adjacent to other protected lands? If so, please describe, and that would, oh yes, map is on the supporting documentation.
Protection status of adjacent parcels.
Yes. So does the property contribute to an open space or greenway network? If so, please describe. And that is something else that, you would see on the map, but you also want, so these two questions are that, they're related to the map that needs to be submitted, but this is the narrative that goes with the map to answer these questions. Is the project under threat of potential habitat loss or degradation? If so, please describe. And this is where they're saying, if it's under threat of development, but we didn't want to use that word, but generally that would be one of the things that they're looking at. So in this question, if it's on the market and it's zoned for a whole bunch of residential units, that is a potential threat of habitat loss or degradation. So we want the applicant to talk about that in this question. Does the project contribute to a scenic viewshed? If so, please describe. And does the project contain features of cultural or historical importance? If so, please describe. A lot of this information, again, can be found on different online resources or just local knowledge. Does the project, and this is the one question that we talked about, does the project provide public access? If so, please describe the kind and extent of public access, because that gives the extra points. Grant. And then finally, the matching funds. What is the status of matching funds for the project? So please describe, the list of all in-hand funding sources and amounts and the status of any outstanding funding requests. So this is kind of the narrative that goes along with the matching funds part of the financial budget project spreadsheet there. And then finally, we have the application certification page, which is basically saying that everything I put in this application is true, and to the best of my knowledge.
So with this, there are a couple different pieces in here, prompts that are requirements, but let's say somebody submits this and they missed it or they didn't understand, is there a curative process to somebody reviews it and says, you missed the appropriate biodiversity information? So would that be part of the process with county planning staff or somebody to look at these to make sure they're done
Yeah,
first and
so
then-
before they come to you,
Yeah.
ideally, the planning staff, whoever the open space coordinator is, would go through and make sure that the application is complete before it gets to you. If it's not complete, they could go back to the applicant to get that information. If it's, if there's lots of applications and there's a hard deadline, then maybe that applicant has to wait until the next time applications are, the next application deadline. I think that's, that's something that's gonna have to, kind of, another one of those discretion questions once the program gets up and running.
And this application certification, going back to the very beginning of the contact person for the project, this person is saying, I, the undersigned, have the authority to submit this application, am the authorized contact person for this grant. And that is important in that if it's a municipality, they're designating one person as the contact person, so that we don't get into discussions with township supervisors or borough like you can't be listening to 5 different people. There is one spokesperson for this application, and that spokesperson has been authorized by that board to be that spokesperson.
And that spokesperson can be different than the person that's authorized to sign documents. And that's where we don't have this yet because it is more of a legal thing. I started drafting one based on the DCNR version. But one of the things under the checklist is a grant application resolution. And so that's something that, it would be, needs to go to the municipality for resolution or your land trust board for the resolution of this person is authorized to sign the grant agreement. We've approved this application and this person is authorized to sign the grant agreement.
I think it'd be wise to ask if anybody thinks that there is information that we want, that these questions aren't gonna get us. I think that's the way for us to look at these. Is there something you'd wanna know about a property that these questions aren't gonna get for us?
Shouldn't this match up identically, though, to our criteria
It
question?
does.
It does.
Well, there's 13 criteria items, and there's 11 plus this extra matching fund thing, which would be 12. We don't cover the easement and ability to manage and maintain the site?
Oh, that's in the
That's
top
not-
question.
Oh, yeah,
That's a yes
That was in the
no,
project
it's not a-
description.
All right, well, just as long as everything's covered there, because that's
Yeah.
what we're using
Yes.
to do our,
Yeah, I put that up in the top because I wanted to combine it. It needs to be combined with the question of who's the ultimate holder. So if the applicant isn't the ultimate holder, that's something that you need to know up front. And so we could pull that out, the manage and maintain, and make it a separate question if we're concerned that it might get not enough attention in that first section. Or we could leave it
as
in the
long
first
as,
section.
they're the ones that have to understand it. the applicant, so as long as they understand, if it's,
I mean, as long as they're going through and answering every single bullet and every single question, we should get that information.
it kind of goes to your point about make it, if we didn't do our job to make the application right, then shame on us.
Only other is, if this does become an online document, like, suggestion is either links or reference points for some folks explaining what some of these words are actually looking for, like what these definitions are. You know, we might get answers on stuff that's like, yes, it's totally that, and it's not, because they have no clue what we just asked in a question. So
Yeah, as
making
long
sure
as-
there's annotations on where this is coming from.
Yeah, ideally, there would be hyperlinks
Yeah.
with this. So when we're talking about, go look at this plan or look at this assessment, we would have a hyperlink so that they could do that.
Yeah.
And, where it talks about, even when it talks about the appraisal, see appraisal requirements and format, there'd be a hyperlink that then takes you to this appraisal
Yeah,
requirements.
I think that's the key piece, is to make sure that we have that we're giving appropriate information on what these mean in a sentence so that we're getting accurate answers.
So if we were to do it like Chester County does, which is, I think, fillable forms, and then you email everything ideally, and you're not printing it and bringing it in, that you would, all the forms would be, you would have a website that had something like, kind of like the checklist, but it would have the list of all the different documents, and they would all be hyperlinked, and then within the application itself, like, everything would be cross-hyperlinked, so that, like, when you pulled the PDF form up on your computer and were typing into it, you could click on the hyperlink to see, like, what does this mean?
That's good, because I definitely agree, when somebody starts to fill something like this out, it might not be real clear, so that's great that.
Well, then the other thing would be, is that they should also be talking to the open space coordinator if they have any questions.
Sure.
To make sure that they're doing this properly.
Delaware County, for at least the first 2 rounds of their grant program, had a webinar for municipalities. They held it twice, and it was recorded. And the first one, they didn't get great attendance, but the second one, they got great attendance.
And that may be like that kind of workshop thing we do.
Yeah.
Explaining how this works.
So
It was
we've hit
during
8 PM.
COVID, so
I don't,
it's
I don't want to keep anybody long.
I just want to make one suggestion. Don, I think you did a fantastic job. Thank you very much for this work. I think the first question, I'm a little concerned about the first question because I'm not sure, like question 2 really explains what you want. I think question number 1, I'll give you an example. My wife Lee and I bought 4 acres of land. It was an abandoned cow pasture, okay? Now, somebody might write that in an application that it's, undergoing succession or something. Well, this thing we bought with our eyes wide open, we knew what it was. It was covered with 25-year-old autumn olive. And that is a huge deal to take care of, yes. Whereas if it was an abandoned field that has gray birch and aspen growing up in it, that's a whole different situation. So I really feel like we need a little more information. Give them some prompts or something to help them make sure they describe the condition of the house, not just, we might not get enough information with what it says. That's the only one I'm worried about. All the rest of them I think are excellent.
So I would say that homework for everybody is to go through this
No free lecture.
and read all of these other documents to see what questions you have and what other information you think is missing so that we can work through adding that information into these things.
And we may be asking you for your questions in advance of the December meeting, so we can be prepared.
Yeah.
Like a situation like Dan mentioned, so when a site visit would be done there, then you would see what's going on there, right?
Yeah, and it might not stop us from recommending the project,
Right.
but it might make us say, oh, this one's gonna take a lot more work to be managed, to be good habitat, to be good quality land for us to buy. And so we might have some requirements for the applicant to make sure that, like the Game Commission that Trexler nature preserve, you're familiar with that, they're removing autumn olives and trying to make meadows and all that.
And even with some of this, you know, we all know that if you go to a property at a different time of the year, you'll see different things, different flora, different fauna. You might suggest on like appropriate times to document this are, you know, when things are in bloom and when it's green outside, so you kind of, they can tell you what's actually going on with it.
So our homework for next meeting, and for before next meeting, is to come up with any suggestions on this, right? Is that what you're suggesting, Ann?
Yep.
Get them to Dawn by, I don't know.
Or Dawn or Jason
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think you send them to Jason and
Send
then
to
Jason
Jason.
will pass them
So,
on to
yeah.
us.
And we'll,
Give them something to do.
but we need a week or two before the meeting to make any, we need 2 weeks before the meeting to make the changes. So I would say 2 weeks from now, have your homework done. And send in,
And that's just, right now, that's just for the application.
right,
So
just the
that's,
application.
the homework for the application is just look through it and see if there's anything you think we need to add.
Yeah.
The other
I
homework
agree.
before the next meeting is to like, because, you know, you guys just got this stuff Monday, is to look through this. And so that when we get to the next meeting, everybody's seen it, and so if we're working through the different things, you're familiar with it, and maybe can come up with questions of what you think should be added or changed. Now, I know that the program guidelines, that was something I wanted to get out the door, so I didn't, as you get further along in it, some of the details are missing, like in those later sections, because I wanted to get it out the door so that you all could see it for this meeting, in case we got to the point where we could start going through that.
Do you have a question for Dawn or no? The 7th of December is 2 weeks before our next meeting on the 21st.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
question about if it's awful weather, because we're getting to that season. What's the contingency plan for none of us can get over the hill here at Jim Thorpe?
Well,
If the weather is bad, Jason will send out an email, we'll definitely let everybody know.
Do we move it?
And what time do you
you-
usually have to leave?
Me?
Yeah.
I have to leave at 4:30.
Oh, yeah, you guys have
Yeah.
to
I
travel.
mean, can we do it all virtually if the weather's bad?
Yeah, can we move it to Zoom, or is that not an option?
Yeah.
Should we pose that as a question and get an answer back?
I mean, yeah, I don't see a Zoom problem as long as, you know, as long as Brandon could get in to host it somewhere, that is an option.
But then it has to be open to the public too, right?
No, not necessarily. I can make it so they can't join.
Okay.
It's gonna still stream on
Okay.
Facebook, so
Gotcha.
they'll still see
So
that.
it's streamed, but.
Yeah.
Everybody will get an invitation.
Yeah.
You know, we really want to thank you all. We know this is the hard part. Once we get this thing all set up, it's gonna be a lot more enjoyable. Or maybe this part's enjoyable for you, I don't know.
But yeah, we would try to get something out by 2:30, I would say, at the latest. This way, if the county's already closed, you're not gonna see me coming down here. If you see some kind of notice that the county's been closed, yeah, we'll probably will cancel the meeting.
Or if lots of places are without power, maybe we can't do a virtual meeting. I mean, I have a battery backup for my internet, but that only lasts for so long.
I'll have to make some cookies or something.
But yeah, we can cross that bridge when we come to it.
So you need an adjournment motion?
Yeah.
Well, boss is here, do you
Oh,
want?
no, I didn't start the meeting.
Okay,
Go ahead.
all right. Any further business?
I move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn, all righty. Thank you, everyone, we'll see you back for the 20, do you need a second?
Yes.
Second. See everybody on the 21st.
Thank you all. Good job.